It's 2:30 a.m. when my phone rings. My daughter's voice is barely a whisper, a desperate plea for me to come get her. When I arrive at her in-law's house, her mother-in-law blocks the door, claiming she isn't leaving. I force my way inside anyway. Seeing my daughter unconscious, her arms covered in marks, a wave of pure anger hits me. I'm Lucas Harrington. I'm 70 years old, and I've spent my life building the skyscrapers that shape the Chicago skyline. I know how to spot a crack in the foundation. I know how to pour concrete that stands for a century, and I know how to got a crack in the foundation before the whole structure comes crashing down. But the biggest crack I ever ignored in my life was the family my daughter Emily married into. You know how she is, Dad. Before I tell you what I did with the heavy-duty bolt cutters from my truck, make sure to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching this from. I want to see who stands with me today. When the phone rang, the digital clock on my nightstand read 2:28 a.m. It wasn't a normal ring. You know how she is, Dad. In the dead silence of an old man living alone, it sounded like a fire alarm. I fumbled for my glasses and saw Emily's name on the screen. My heart started pounding against my ribs because Emily never calls that late. She knows I go to sleep at 9:00 p.m. sharp. I swiped to answer and pressed the phone to my ear, expecting her to cry or apologize for waking me up. Instead, the "know how she is, Dad," the sound I heard made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was heavy, raspy, breathing, like someone trying to draw air through a straw. Then her voice came through. It was incredibly faint, forcing me to press the phone tight against my ear. "Dad, they're hurting me. The needles, please, just come." Then the line went dead. I didn't call back. I didn't sit there wondering if it was a nightmare. I moved with a speed I didn't know this 70-year-old body was still capable of. I threw off the covers and grabbed my jeans from the chair. Barefoot, I shoved my feet into my work boots and grabbed my keys. Running past the kitchen, I didn't grab a weapon. I grabbed my toolkit from the hallway closet. It was pure instinct. I'm a builder. I fix things. And right now, my daughter was broken. You know how she is, Dad? I jumped into my old Ford F-150. The engine roared to life, a sound that usually brings me comfort, but tonight it felt agonizingly slow. I backed out of the driveway, tearing up a patch of grass, and threw it into drive. It usually takes 30 minutes to get to the Worth estate. I made it in 15. You know how she is, Dad. The empty streets of Chicago blurred past my windows like a concrete skeleton. I ran 3 red lights. I didn't care. The only thing echoing in my mind was that faint whisper. Needles. What did she mean by needles? Emily is a kindergarten teacher, the gentlest soul I know. She shivers with fear just getting a routine shot at the doctor. It made no sense for needles to be anywhere near her unless someone was forcing them on her. I pulled up to the Worth mansion. It was a massive, modern monstrosity of glass and sharp angles, sitting behind a wrought iron gate. It looked like a fortress designed to keep people out or lock secrets in. You know, I didn't wait for the gate to open. I drove my truck right up onto the curb, crushing their manicured bushes, and parked right by the front porch. The high beams flooded the main entrance with blinding white light. Beatrice Worth was already there. My daughter's mother-in-law was standing behind the massive glass front door. My daughter, a silk robe, the mass front door. She wore a silk robe that probably cost more than my truck, holding a glass of red wine. She looked like she was waiting for a delivery, not her daughter-in-law's father. She didn't look scared. She just looked annoyed. You know how she is, Dad? I jumped out of the truck, leaving the door open and the engine running. I strode up the steps, my heavy work boots thudding against the marble. Beatrice just stood on the other side of the glass, taking a sip of her wine. She locked eyes with me, a smirk on her face. I reached for the handle. Locked. Of course it was. "Open the door!" "Beatrice," I growled, my voice low and raspy from the adrenaline. I could see her lips moving. She wasn't shouting. She enunciated every single word so I could read her lips. "Go home, Lucas. She's sleeping." I slammed my fist against the glass. It was reinforced hurricane glass. It didn't even vibrate. I yelled at her. "You're hurting her. Open this door, or I will tear it down." Gave a dramatic dad. Beatrice gave a dramatic sigh. She stepped closer to the glass and raised her voice, muffled but audible. "She's having an episode. Lucas, we called the family doctor. She's paranoid right now. If you come in, you'll only make it worse. Now, get off my property before I have you arrested for trespassing." Episode. An episode. That was their favorite word. For the last 3 months, every time I tried to see Emily, they claimed she was having an episode. Said she was tired, emotional, adjusting to medication. I had believed their lies because I wanted to respect my daughter's marriage. But tonight, the lies stopped. I looked at Beatrice. I saw the smug satisfaction on her face. She thought she won. She thought a locked door and a property deed were enough to stop a father. She forgot who I was. I laid the foundations for half this city. How she is, Dad. I know that if you apply enough pressure to the right spot, anything can be broken. I didn't say another word. I turned my back on her. I could feel her watching me, probably smiling, thinking I was giving up and walking away. I walked back to my truck, reached into the bed, and pulled out my bolt cutters. They were 36 inches of solid steel, heavy and cold in my hands, built to snap through hardened locks and thick chains. I turned back toward the house. The smile vanished from Beatrice's face. She dropped her wine glass. "You know how she is, Dad. It shattered on the floor inside, spilling dark red liquid everywhere." She started mouthing the word "no." Pointing at me with her manicured nails, her lips moved. "I'll sue you." I walked up the steps. I didn't run. I moved with the steady pace of a man going to work. When I reached the door, I didn't aim for the lock. "You know how she is, Dad." I swung the heavy steel handles back like a baseball bat and slammed them right into the center of the glass panel. The sound was like a gunshot. The safety glass didn't just crack, it exploded. Thousands of tiny glass cubes rained down onto the marble floor of the foyer. The security alarm started blaring. "How she is, Dad?" A piercing shriek echoing through the neighborhood. Beatrice screamed, scrambling backward and slipping on the spilled wine and shattered glass. "You know how she is, Dad." I kicked away the remaining fragments in the frame and stepped inside. The glass crunched beneath my work boots. It was the most satisfying sound I'd heard in years and years. "Where is she?" I demanded. Beatrice was on the floor, clutching her robe at her neck, her face completely pale. "You're insane!" she shrieked. "You're a maniac! Security! Derek, call the police!" I didn't wait for an answer. I knew where Emily's room was. On the second floor, the master suite she shared with her spineless husband. I took the stairs 2 at a time, ignoring the sharp pain in my bad knee. You know about it. The adrenaline was pumping so hard my vision started to tunnel. I had to see her. I had to know she was alive. I hit the top of the landing and turned toward the master bedroom. The door was shut. 5 paces away, it swung open. "You know how she is, Dad." It was Derek, my son-in-law. He looked like a complete mess, sweaty, hair disheveled, wearing only pajama pants. His eyes widened when he saw me. He held out his arms, blocking the doorway. "Dad, stop! You can't go in there." "Get out of my way, Derek," I warned him. My hands were still gripping the bolt cutters. I wasn't threatening him with them, but I wasn't putting them down either. He froze, shaking his head frantically. "No, listen to me. She's completely lost it. She has a knife, Dad. She's dangerous. If you go in there, she might hurt you. She thinks everyone is out to get her." I stopped. Except for the distant wail of the house alarm, the hallway was dead silent. I looked at Derek, at his shaking hands, at the sweat on his upper lip. Then I looked past him into the shadows of the bedroom. I didn't see a frantic woman with a weapon. I saw a terrifying, profound stillness that scared me more than anything else. I tightened my grip on the steel handles. "If she has a knife, Derek, why aren't you hurt?" I didn't wait for him to answer. Derek stammered, trying to piece together a lie that fit the situation, but I was done listening. I lowered my shoulder and charged forward with the force of a wrecking ball. He went flying backward, crashing into a hallway table and sending a vase shattering to the floor. I didn't give him a second look. "You know how she is, Dad." I raised my boot and kicked the door panel right next to the handle. "You know how she is, Dad?" The wood splintered with a sharp crack, and the door swung inward, exposing the nightmare they had been hiding. The air in the room was heavy and stifling, smelling of rubbing alcohol and a sharp, metallic tang. This didn't smell like a bedroom for a young couple. It smelled like a hospital ward where people are left to deteriorate. I stepped inside, and my heart stopped for a full second. There was no dangerous woman. There was no chaos. There was only my little girl, Emily, restrained to the bed like an animal. She was bound tightly in leather straps, the kind used in psychiatric facilities. Her wrists skin around them, turning deep purple. Her ankles were secured to the footboard. She wasn't moving. Her head was slumped to the side, a trace of white foam pooling at the corner of her mouth. Her eyes were open, but they had rolled back, showing only the whites. I dropped the bolt cutters. They hit the carpet with a dull thud. I rushed to her side, dropping to my knees. "Emily, baby, Dad is here." I reached out and cupped her face. Her skin was ice cold, clammy, and drenched in sweat. "You know how she is, Dad." I looked at her arms. Her pajama sleeves were pushed up, and what I saw made me want to tear the entire house down piece by piece. The inside of her arms was a map of sheer suffering. They were covered in fresh needle marks, some still oozing tiny drops, others already turned into dark, ugly bruises. Derek scrambled to the doorway behind me, gasping for air and clutching his side. Seeing me stare at the marks, he immediately went into damage control. "It's heroin," he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "She's been using for months, Dad. We tried to stop her. She gets violent when she's high. We had to restrain her so she wouldn't hurt herself. Look at her. She did this to herself. I didn't turn around." I placed 2 fingers on Emily's neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, but terrifyingly weak. It was fluttering, not beating, like a trapped bird running out of air. "She's overdosing, Derek," I roared, never taking my eyes off her face. "Call an ambulance right now." "I'm not calling anyone until she calms down," Derek shouted, stepping into the room. "If we call 911, you know how she is, Dad. They'll arrest her for possession. We're protecting her reputation. We are handling this. I looked at the foam on her lips, looked at the restraints. This wasn't handling it. This was leaving her to perish. I reached down to unbuckle the heavy leather strap on her left wrist. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a pure, white-hot fury rolling through my veins like lava. The leather was thick and stiff. I struggled with the buckle pin, desperate to free her. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my shoulder and yanked me backward. It was Derek. "Get away from her," he yelled. "You don't know what you're doing. She needs to ride this out." That was the final mistake Derek would make that night. This time, I didn't just push him away. "You know how she is, Dad." I stood up, turning around with the full momentum of 70 years of hard labor behind me. I curled my right hand into a fist. Knuckles scarred from decades of laying brick and pouring concrete, I drove that fist straight into the center of his face. With a sickening crunch, "You know how she is, Dad." His nose gave way completely. It was a sound I'd heard on construction sites when timber snaps under too much weight. Derek didn't even scream right away. He dropped instantly. He collapsed onto the floor, clutching his face as splattered through his fingers. He curled into his ball, whimpering loudly. I stood over him, breathing heavily. "And I'll make sure you never," walking heavily. "You touch me again, and I'll make sure you never walk free again." I turned toward the doorway and saw Beatrice standing there. She wasn't checking on her son, and she wasn't checking on her daughter-in-law. She was holding up her phone, recording me. Her face was a mask of cold, calculated malice. "I got it all on video." "I got all on video, Lucas," she said, her voice steady and venomous, breaking and entering. "Assault with a deadly weapon. And now battery. You're going to spend the rest of your life in prison." She brought the phone to her ear. I could hear the operator on the other end. "Yes, please hurry. He's out of his mind. He's armed. He just knocked my son unconscious. My life is in danger. He's trying to destroy us." She wasn't calling an ambulance for Emily. She was calling the police on me, setting the stage and weaving her web of lies before the curtain even went up. Dirt. I didn't waste my breath on her. I turned back to Emily. "You house Wobble." Every second Beatrice spent fabricating her story was a second closer to tragedy for my daughter. Leaning over the bed, my fingers moved with desperate speed. "You know how she is, Dad." Panic gave me strength. I unbuckled her left wrist, then her right. Her arms fell limply to her sides. She didn't respond at all, heavy and still. "Emily," I whispered, gently tapping her cheek. "Emily, wake up. Open your eyes." Nothing. Just that heavy, shallow breathing. Just that heavy. I slid my arms beneath her and lifted her up. She was terrifyingly light. I remembered holding her just like this when she was 5 years old, falling asleep in the car. She felt exactly the same now, fragile and full of trust. But back then, I was carrying her to a warm bed. Now, I was carrying her out of a house of horrors. I stood up, holding her close. "You know how she is, my Said." Her head rested against my shoulder, the trace of foam from her lips staining my flannel shirt. I turned toward the door. I had to get her to my truck, to a hospital that wasn't on the Worth family payroll. Beatrice was still blocking the doorway. "Get out of my way," I said. She smiled. It was a tiny, triumphant smirk. "You're not going anywhere, Lucas. Listen." Then I heard it. The wail of sirens getting louder and louder. They were close. Too close. Beatrice must have hit a silent alarm the second I drove onto the lawn. Blue and red lights began flashing against the hallway walls, reflecting off the shattered glass downstairs. Tires screeched in the driveway. Car doors slammed. "Police, put your hands up and come out." "I'm out," a loud voice boomed through a megaphone. Beatrice stepped aside, gesturing down the hallway with mocking politeness. "Go ahead, Lucas. Walk out there. They're expecting a violent intruder." "You know how she is, Dad. Do you think they'll ask questions first or just open fire?" I looked at Derek, groaning on the floor. I looked at the bolt cutters on the carpet. I looked at my unconscious daughter in my arms. It looked exactly the way Beatrice wanted it to, a botched home invasion and an assault. But I couldn't stay. If I stayed, Emily wouldn't make it. I held my daughter tighter, ignoring the triumph in Beatrice's eyes, and walked past her. I reached the landing. Below me, the front door was kicked wide open. 3 armed officers rushed into the foyer, stepping over the shattered glass. They looked up and saw me on the stairs. "Freeze! Put the girl down! Hands in the air!" "You know how she is, Dad." 3 weapons pointed straight at my chest. I stopped at the top of the stairs. I didn't put her down. I couldn't. "She's fading," I shouted, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "She needs a hospital. Put the girl down, or we will fire," the lead officer yelled, his finger tightening on the trigger. I looked down at Emily's pale face, then back at the officers. I took a step forward. "Don't shoot," I pleaded. "Please, she's my daughter." But behind me, Beatrice screamed even louder. "He has a weapon. He's going to hurt her." The officers tensed instantly. The air in the house crackled with tension, on the verge of a violent escalation. I stood at the edge of the stairs, holding the only thing in the world that mattered to me, while the world prepared to pull the trigger. The standoff on the stairs didn't end with a conflict, but it didn't end with a conflict, but it did end with me in handcuffs. I surrendered, not because I knew if I frayed for my life, but because I knew around no one would be left to fight for Emily. They dragged me out of the Worth mansion and pressed me into the back of a squad car while paramedics loaded my daughter into an ambulance. Through the wire mesh of the police car window, I watched Beatrice standing on the porch, wrapping a cashmere shawl around her shoulders. You know how she is, Dad. Looking like a grieving victim rather than the architect of this nightmare. You know how she is, Dad. The emergency room at this hospital was a blinding white purgatory of flickering fluorescent lights and a sterile smell that couldn't mask the underlying dread. They handcuffed my right wrist to the metal armrest of a hard plastic chair in the waiting area. I wasn't treated like an anxious father. I was treated like a criminal, a suspect, a threat. My flannel shirt was torn and stained with sweat. My work boots were covered in mud from the Worth's lawn. My knuckles were bruised and bloodied from when I hit Derek. Tum non ton tumusen. Nant Tuesday is to the left about it. To the medical staff passing by, I looked exactly like the violent, unhinged old man Beatrice had described. Beatrice arrived 20 minutes later. She wasn't alone. You know how she is, Dad? Derek walked in beside her, a heavy bandage across his broken nose. Another man followed in a sharp gray suit, their family lawyer, no doubt. You know how she is, Dad. But the worst part wasn't who she brought. It was who she walked straight toward. He'd laughed about us. A doctor in a spotless white coat stepped through the double doors of the trauma bay. He didn't look like the exhausted ER doctors on shift. He looked well-rested, exuding an air of wealth, with silver hair and a watch that cost more than my house. Beatrice greeted him by name. Dr. Sterling. She reached out to take his hand, her face contorting into a dramatic mask of worry. "Thank God you're here," she said loudly. "Thank God you're here," she said loudly, making sure the officer guarding me heard every word. "This has been the most horrific night of our lives." "Is she stable? Did the substances cause permanent damage?" The officer next to me shifted his weight, throwing a harsh glare in my direction. His look said it all. Even the doctor knew she was using. Dr. Sterling nodded gravely, patting Beatrice's hand. "We have her sedated, Beatrice. Her heart rate was highly unstable, but we managed to get it under control. Your concerns were valid. The toxicology panel shows a massive amount of opioids in her system. It's a miracle her heart didn't stop before the ambulance arrived. You know how she is, Dad. I lunged forward in the chair, the handcuffs digging deep into my wrist. That's a lie, I roared. She doesn't touch drugs. Check her blood properly. Check for poison. Sit down, Mr. Harrington, the officer snapped, forcing me back into the seat. Beatrice looked at me with an expression of sorrow and pity. She reached into her designer bag, pulled out a thick manila folder, and handed it to the officer. "Officer, please," she said softly. "You know how she is, Dad? My son's father-in-law is in denial. We've tried to help him understand, but he refuses to accept the truth. These are Emily's psychiatric records. She's been struggling with severe bipolar disorder and substance abuse for 2 years. We have documented incidents of self-harm. That is why we had to restrain her. You know how she is, Dad. It was for her own safety." The officer opened the folder. I could see Dad. I could see official letterheads, charts, prescriptions, and detailed notes. It was a masterpiece of deception. They had been planning this for months, fabricating a paper trail to bury my daughter under a mountain of lies. "I don't believe it," I growled. "Let me see those papers." Emily has never touched drugs in her life. She's a teacher. She's a good person. The officer snapped the folder shut, looking at me with disgust. "Sir, these documents look incredibly clear to me, and given the fact that you just put your son-in-law in the hospital, I'm inclined to believe the people who didn't break down a door with bolt cutters tonight." Beatrice wiped a fake tear from her cheek. "We just want to help her, officer. We've found an excellent private facility that specializes in severe cases like hers. We just want our Emily back." As they spoke, the double doors to the treatment area opened. A nurse pushed a gurney into the hallway, preparing to transfer a patient. It was Emily. She looked even worse than she did at the house. Her skin was a dull gray. Her breathing was shallow, completely assisted by machines, but she was conscious, her eyes barely open. Her eyelids fluttered as she turned her head slightly, her gaze vacant, searching the ceiling. "Emily! Emily!" I yelled, rattling the cuffs. "Emily, look at me. Dad is here." She didn't turn toward my voice. She couldn't. Then I saw it. The nurse, walking alongside the gurney, reached into her scrub's pocket. She didn't pull out a chart or a thermometer. She pulled out a syringe. It was small, filled with a clear, thick liquid that looked heavier than saline. It looked as thick as syrup. Beatrice and Dr. Sterling were busy distracting the officer with their sob story. "You know how she is, Dad. No one was looking at the gurney except me." The nurse glanced around quickly, checking the hallway. Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. She didn't look like a medical professional doing her job. "She is, Dad." She looked like a thief caught in the act. She looked terrified. With a swift, practiced movement, she capped the needle and injected the fluid directly into Emily's IV port. You know how she is. She didn't check a chart or sanitize the port. She just slammed the plunger down in one rapid motion and hid the empty syringe back in her pocket. "Stop!" I screamed. "What did you just give her?" "Officer, look. She just injected something." The officer spun around, his hand flying to his holster. "What's going on?" Dr. Sterling smoothly stepped in, blocking the officer's view of the nurse. "Just a mild sedative, officer. Standard procedure for a transfer." She was becoming agitated. "We need to keep her calm to prevent another seizure." He was lying. I saw Emily's reaction. You know how she is, Dad. It was definitely no sedative. Her body suddenly went rigid on the gurney. Her back arched slightly, her fingers curling into claws. You know how she is, Dad? Her mouth opened in a silent gasp of distress before she went completely limp. It wasn't natural. It looked as if her entire system had been forced to shut down by a switch. That wasn't a sedative, I roared, struggling wildly, the metal legs of the chair screeching against the floor. You're killing her! Enough, the officer snapped, getting right in my face. You're causing a disruption in a hospital. You know how she is, Dad. One more word and I'm tossing you into a holding cell right now. Beatrice stepped up behind the officer. She looked at me with cold, lifeless eyes. Officer, I think it's best if Mr. Harrington is removed. He's clearly unstable. You know how she is, Dad. We are filing for a restraining order, but given his violent behavior tonight, surely you can keep him away from the patient. The officer nodded. Mr. Harrington, you know how she is, Dad. I'm issuing an emergency protective order right now. You know how she is, Dad. You are to stay 500 feet away from your daughter and the Worth family. If you violate this, you go straight to jail. Do you understand? I slumped back into the chair. My wrist was bleeding where the metal edge had cut into my skin. I realized in that moment that screaming wouldn't save her. Violence wouldn't save her either. They controlled the narrative. They owned the doctor. They were using the law as a shield. I watched them push Emily down the hallway away from me. I watched the nurse who refused to look me in the eye. I watched Dr. Sterling whispering something to Derek. I had to keep a clear head. I needed my freedom. I couldn't do anything from a jail cell. I understand, I said quietly. My voice was completely flat, dangerously calm. Good, the officer said, unlocking the cuff. Get out of here. If I see you anywhere near this hospital again, you're done. I stood up, rubbing my wrist. I didn't look at Beatrice. You know how she is, Dad. I didn't want her to see the absolute determination in my eyes. I turned to leave, but Dr. Sterling's voice stopped me cold. Nurse, prepare the patient for immediate transport, Dr. Sterling said, clear and loud. Her know how she is, Dad. Her husband has signed the release forms. We are moving her to the Serene Hills Care Facility immediately. The transport vehicle is waiting at the back. I froze. Serene Hills. With all my years in construction, I knew every hospital and clinic in this state. I'd even worked on expansions for 3 of them, but I had never heard of Serene Hills. It wasn't a hospital. It was a black hole, a place where they could hide her away, where they could hide her away, where no one would hear her, where a father would never find her. They weren't treating her. They were making her disappear from the world entirely. I walked out through the glass sliding doors into the cold night air. I didn't tow my truck. I didn't head for my truck. I walked around the corner into the shadows and waited. The law put 500 feet between put 500 feet between my daughter and me, but I had enough fury driving me to follow that transport board vehicle, even if I had to run until my heart gave out. The holding cell smelled of old urine and industrial bleach. It was a scent I knew too well from some of the worst construction sites in Chicago, but tonight it smelled like failure. You know how she is, Dad. I sat on the cold metal bench, elbows on my knees, staring at the concrete floor. The adrenaline from the hospital was fading, replaced by a cold, hard realization. I had walked right into their trap. Beatrice and Derek wanted to provoke me. They wanted me to look like a violent, unhinged old man, so they could cast me aside. You know how she is, Dad, and I had given them exactly what they wanted. I looked at the marks left by the handcuffs on my wrists. I thought of Emily lying on that gurney, her limp body, her consciousness clouded by whatever unknown substance the nurse had injected into her IV. They had separated us. They built a wall made of legal documents and police officers between a father and his daughter. But building walls was my trade. Ims what's man con. You know how she is. I knew how to build them, and I knew how to tear them down. Using my one phone call, I dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. Harrison Thorne. You know how she is, Dad. He wasn't some mild-mannered family lawyer. He was a shark in a $3,000 suit. He was the attorney you called when you wanted to dismantle someone completely. You know how she is, Dad. The phone rang only twice before he picked up, even though it was 3:90 a.m. Harrison. Harrison. It's Luke Harrington, I said. I didn't need to explain who I was. Harrison never forgot a client, especially not the one who handed him the largest Skyline project litigation in the city, making him a senior partner, sharp and alert. Luke, his voice calling me, at this hour. At this hour? I'm at the 5th District Police Station. Beatrice Worth and her son just hit me with assault charges. I need to get out immediately. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. Don't say a word, don't sign anything. I hung up and leaned against the cinder block wall. Waiting was the hardest part, but it gave me time to think. It let me connect the dots I had been too blind to see before. Why now? Why were they doing this to Emily right now? Why were they doing this to Emily now? Beatrice cared about her reputation above all else. Having a daughter-in-law in a facility did nothing for her image as a perfect charitable was worse. Unless the alternative was worse, or unless the financial reward was big enough to risk the scandal. Then it hit me. The trust fund. You know how she is. My late wife, Sarah, had set up a trust fund for Emily before she passed. It was $5 million. You know how she is, Dad, built from Sarah's family investments and the profits from my construction company. Sarah was smart. She knew Emily was too kind, too trusting. You know how kind did? She locked the money away until Emily turned 35, wanting her to be mature enough to handle that kind of wealth. Emily was turning 35 in exactly 3 months. If Emily was healthy and of sound mind on her birthday, she would gain complete control of that $5 million. She could leave Derek. She could buy a new house. She could cut Beatrice off financially. But what if Emily was declared mentally incompetent before her birthday? You know how she is. What if she was placed in a long-term care facility? You know how she is, Dad. If a court ruled she couldn't manage her own affairs, control of the trust fund would default to her next of kin, her legal guardian, her husband. Derek. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about substance abuse or mental illness. This was a robbery, a $5 million heist happening in slow motion. They had been manipulating her for the past year, making her look unstable and giving her medication to keep her sick, all to seize that money before the deadline. You know how she is, Dad. I knew they were drowning in debt. I knew Beatrice had mortgaged that mansion 3 times over. I knew Derek was a failed day trader. They needed that money to survive. You know how she is, Dad, and they were willing to sacrifice my daughter's life to get it. I stood up and how she is, Dad. I began pacing the small cell. 3 steps forward, turn. 3 steps back, turn. The anger was building again, but this time it had a clear direction. It was cold. I wasn't going to just strike Derek in the face again. I was going to dismantle his entire life, brick by brick. The heavy steel door buzzed and slid open. An officer stepped in, looking far less arrogant than the one at the hospital. Your lawyer is here, processing your release now. Harrison Thorne was waiting for me in the lobby. You know how she is, Dad, looking completely out of place in the dingy police station. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly combed. You know how she is, Dad. He held a briefcase in one hand and a bag with my personal belongings in the other. Luke. He nodded at me. He didn't ask how I was doing. He knew I wasn't well. We walked out of the station into the chilly pre-dawn air. The city was still asleep, dark and quiet. You know how she is, Dad. The streetlights buzzed overhead, casting shadows on the pavement. What's the situation, Harrison? I asked, taking the bag. It's messy, Luke, he said, walking toward his black sedan. Beatrice filed for an emergency restraining order. The judge granted a temporary order based on the hospital report and the police statements. You know how she is, Dad. You can't go within 500 feet of Emily or the Worth estate until the hearing next week. I stopped in my tracks. Next week? Harrison, they're killing her. You know how she is, Dad. They injected something into her right in front of me. This is about the trust fund. Her birthday. Dad, her birthday is in 90 days. They're trying to have her declared incompetent so Derek can get the money. Harrison stopped and looked at me, his eyes narrowing. You know how's you shoed? That explains why they're rushing. If that's their plan, they need a swift diagnosis and an immediate placement. Where is she? I asked. Spores. Dr. Sterling said they were transferring her to a place called Serene Hills. Yuspin. Harrison pulled out his phone and swiped across the screen. I looked it up while processing your bail. Serene Hills is a private facility about 2 hours north. How she is, Dade. It's a closed ward, high security, incredibly expensive, and extremely private. It's where the wealthy hide their problems. We need to go there, I said, stepping toward his car. Harrison shook his head. Lucas, you can't go. You know how she is, Dadzabam? If you show up there, you're violating a direct order. They'll throw you right back in a cell, and this time, there won't be any bail. You need to go home, clean up, and get some rest. Let me handle the legal side. We'll file for an independent medical evaluation. I ignored him. I ripped open the plastic bag containing my personal effects, my wallet, my keys, and my phone. I powered it on. The screen lit up, showing a photo of Atrient and me at her college graduation. She looked so happy then, so full of life. I'm not going home, Harrison, and I'm not going to Serene Hills either. Harrison looked completely confused. What are you talking about? You just said that's where they're taking her. I tapped an app icon on my phone. She, Tostad. It was a simple tracking app, the kind parents use to keep tabs on their kids. Last year, for Emily's 34th birthday, I gave her how she is, Dad, with a silver locket with a photograph of her mother inside. Derek had mocked it, calling it sentimental junk, but I had crafted it myself. You know how she is, Dad. Hidden inside the lining behind the photo, I had embedded a micro GPS chip with a 3-year battery life. She is, Dad. I told Emily never to take it off, telling her it was a reminder of her mother watching over her. I looked at Harrison. I never told her about the chip. I didn't want her to think I was a controlling old man. It's just, even back then, I had a bad feeling about Derek. I wanted to make sure that if I ever needed to find her, I could. I opened the map. A tiny red dot was flashing on the screen. Harrison leaned over, staring at the display. The transport vehicle left the hospital 30 minutes ago, he said. If they were heading to Serene Hills, they should be on the northbound highway by now. I zoomed in on the map. The dot wasn't in north at all. It was moving east at a high rate of speed. It was moving... Naps. You know how she is, Dad? That's not the route to a clinic, Harrison said, his professional composure cracking. That's the industrial district. I watched the red dot cut through a grid of streets I knew like the back of my hand. It bypassed the highway ramps. It turned onto a road away from residential areas. You know how she is, Dad. Away from hospitals, away from civilization. It was heading straight toward the lakefront. Lucas, why are they going to the lake? Harrison asked. I didn't answer. A knot formed in my stomach. At this hour, there was nothing out there, just warehouses, shipping containers, and the freezing, dark waters of Lake Michigan. My voice trembled with a terrifying realization. The transfer was a total lie. The transfer was a total... The red dot slowed down, then came to a complete stop. It hovered right on the edge of the blue area on the map. "They're at the shipping docks," I said. "The docks, the container yards." At 4 in the morning. Harrison looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in the eyes of that courtroom shark. "Lucas, get in the car." I didn't let him say it twice. "You know how she is, Dad." I threw my bag into the back seat and jumped into the passenger side. Harrison slammed on the gas, and the luxury sedan roared forward, flying through the empty streets. "You know how she is, Dad." I stared at my phone screen, praying the dot would move back toward the road, praying the driver had just taken a wrong turn. But the dot remained stationary. "You know how she is, Dad, right at the water's edge." They weren't trying to treat her. They were trying to erase her, and I was a 20-minute drive away. Harrison dropped me off at the impound lot where my truck had been taken, and I've never moved faster in my life. With shaking hands, I paid the release fee, and the moment I turned the key in my old Ford F-150, I felt a surge of capability I hadn't felt in the lawyer's luxury sedan. This truck was 20 years old, built of heavy American steel, not plastic and fiberglass. It was covered in the dents and scars of a long career on construction sites, just like me. Tonight, it wasn't a work vehicle. It was an instrument of rescue. I tore out of the lot, completely ignoring the speed limits. The GPS dot on my phone was still stationary to the east, out by the industrial piers. I knew that area. There was nothing out there but shipping containers, rusty cranes, and deep, freezing water. If they got Emily onto a boat, you know how she is, Dad. Or if they planned to let the vehicle slip into the dark water, she would be gone forever. That thought made my foot heavy on the gas. The engine let out a deep, guttural roar. You know how she is, Dad, the vibration humming straight through the steering wheel and into my bones. 5 minutes later, I spotted them. The private transport was a plain white van, devoid of any markings except a generic medical cross. It was speeding. You know how she is, Dad, weaving through what little late-night traffic remained in the industrial zone. I narrowed my eyes. That wasn't how someone drove a patient. You know how she is, Dad. That was how someone fled a crime scene. I pressed my truck harder, closing the distance between us. You know how she is, Dad. Through the how she is, Dad. Through the van's rear window, I could see the silhouette of the driver. He wasn't wearing a paramedic's uniform. He wore a dark hoodie and had a cigarette dangling from his mouth. I saw him glance at his rearview mirror and catch sight of my headlights. He didn't slow down. He accelerated. The pursuit was on. So we tore through the warehouse district at 80 miles an hour in a 40-mile-an-hour zone. The van swerved sharply, running a red light and narrowly missing a delivery truck. You know how she is, Dad. I stayed glued to his bumper. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were completely steady. I had driven heavy machinery over ice and mud. You know how she is, Dad. I knew how to handle a vehicle at its absolute limit. I pulled into the left, Dad. I pulled into the left lane, bringing my truck parallel to the van. I turned my head. The driver looked over, and I saw the instant panic in his eyes as he recognized me. He knew exactly who I was. He yanked his steering wheel to the left, trying to ram me, attempting to force me off the road and into the concrete barrier. The scream of metal against metal was deafening, sparks flying past my window like fireworks. The impact rattled my teeth, but I held my line. My truck was heavier. It was a tank. He'd laughed about it. I forced him back into his lane, but he wasn't done. He slammed on his brakes, trying to make me rear-end him, using the back doors where Emily was trapped as a shield. He was using my daughter to protect himself. You know how she is, Dad. The piers were coming up fast. I could see the massive shipping cranes looming against the night sky like metal skeletons. I knew the geography of this road. You know how she is. In less than 2 miles, the pavement simply ended. If he reached the docks, he could drive straight onto a waiting vessel. Or, worse, he'd died, he could drive the van right into the water to destroy the evidence. I glanced in my mirrors. No police, no witnesses, just me and the man trying to harm my child. I realized what I had to do. I couldn't just try to edge him over. I had to stop his vehicle. You know how she is, Dad, but I had to do it in a way that wouldn't harm Emily. I needed a controlled collision. I needed to create an accident scene so massive, so disruptive, that the state police would have no choice but to intervene. I had to summon help by creating a disaster. I took a deep breath, gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. "Hold on, sweetheart," I whispered. I waited for a gap in the concrete barriers. Seeing an open stretch of roadway ahead, I floored the accelerator, pushing the truck past its red line. I surged forward, pulling slightly ahead of the van until my front bumper aligned with his front wheel. Without hesitation, I cranked the wheel hard to the right. That was a maneuver I'd seen law enforcement use on television, but I backed it with the weight of a 3-ton truck. I slammed directly into his front fender. The impact sounded like thunder. The van instantly she is Dad, its rear end fishtailing wildly, tires smoking and screeching against the asphalt. The driver lost all control, the chancel, and the van slid sideways across the road like a hockey puck. But I hadn't calculated the momentum perfectly. My truck entangled with his vehicle. As the van tipped over, it dragged my truck down with it. The world flipped upside down, followed by a deafening crunch of twisting metal and shattering glass. My windshield imploded. The roof of the cab caved in. I felt a sharp, "You know how she is, Dad," tearing pain across my forehead, then the crushing force of the seatbelt locking into my chest. My truck rolled once, twice. "You know how she is, Dad," before slamming into a concrete barrier and coming to a rest upside down. Then, silence. "You know how she is, Dad." For a moment, there was nothing but dead quiet and the hiss of steam escaping from the ruptured radiator. I was hanging upside down in the darkness. My vision was blurry, and a warm, wet fluid dripped into my eyes. Blood. I tasted copper in my mouth. My left arm felt numb, and when I tried to move, a sharp pain shot through my ribs, making me gasp. "Get up," I told myself. "Get up, old man. She's still in there." I fumbled for the seatbelt buckle, my fingers slick with blood. Finally, I found the release, and with a sharp click, I dropped heavily onto the roof of the cab, which was now the floor. Groaning through the pain, I fought off the urge to black out and kicked hard at the passenger side door. It was jammed. I kicked. I kicked again, screaming with everything I had, turning the pain into pure force. The door gave a loud groan and popped open. I crawled out onto the asphalt. The cold night air hit my face, stinging the cut on my forehead. Wiping the blood from my eyes, I looked around. The transport van was 20 yards away, resting on its side. Smoke was pouring from the engine. Ow, how, ow. The driver's side was pinned against the pavement, the rear doors dented but still shut. Then I saw the glow. A small flicker of orange flame was licking at the undercarriage near the fuel tank. A sharp, icy panic pierced right through my concussion. "Emily!" I screamed. I dragged myself toward the van. My legs felt like lead. I stumbled, fell, and got back up, limping toward the burning vehicle. The driver is Dad. The driver had already crawled out through the shattered windshield. He was bleeding, holding his arm, and completely dazed. He saw me coming and he saw the absolute determination in my eyes. He didn't stay to fight. He turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness of the container yards. Coward. I reached the back doors of the van. The handle was jammed. I pulled with how she is, Dad. I pulled with everything I had, but it was locked tight. Looking around for a tool, a rock, anything, I spotted a section of metal guardrail that had been torn away in the crash. I grabbed it, my muscles screaming in protest, and smashed the glass of the rear door window. Shoving my arm past the jagged shards, I reached inside, and flipped the lock mechanism. I yanked the doors open. Emily was inside. The gurney had flipped, but the straps had kept her secured. She was suspended sideways in the dark space, still unconscious, limp as a doll. I climbed into the overturned van, and I could smell the pungent scent of gasoline. My hands shook uncontrollably as I fumbled with the restraints. Faster. The fire was growing. You know how the crackle of flames devouring metal, echoing in the confined space. I popped the last buckle, and Emily fell into my arms, a heavy, dead weight. Wrapping my arms around her and shielding her head, I dragged her toward the open doors and out onto the pavement. I didn't stop there. Shoving my hands under her arms, I hauled her backward across the asphalt, away from the burning vehicle. 10 feet. 20 feet. Behind us, the fuel tank caught. The force of the blast knocked me flat onto the ground. A wave of heat washed over us, singeing the hair on my arms. I curled my body over Emily, protecting her from the flying debris. You know how she is, Dad. I lay on the cold pavement, gasping for breath, my cheek pressed against the ground. I looked at Emily. Her face was smudged with soot, but she was breathing. She was alive. Then I saw the lights. Not the red lights of a fire truck, but blue lights. Dozens of them, rushing down the highway ramp. The state police, the highway patrol. You know how she is, Dad. The neutral force I had prayed for surrounded the scene. Officers flashing with flashlights came running toward us. I tried to stand, to tell them who ordered us. I tried to stand, to tell them who I was, to tell them about the substance they had given her, but my legs finally gave out completely. The world began to spin, and the edges of my vision went dark. Sir, stay down. Medics are coming, a voice shouted from somewhere far away. I took one last look at my daughter, brushing a piece of glass from her hair. I've got you, sweetheart, I whispered. You're safe now. Then the darkness took me. You know how she is, Dad. The first thing I felt was a rhythmic throbbing in my skull, perfectly synchronized with the frantic beeping of a monitor beside my bed. I tried to sit up, you know how she is, but a wave of nausea forced me back onto the pillow. I blinked hard, trying to clear the fog from my eyes. I wasn't in a jail cell, and I wasn't on the cold asphalt of the highway. I was in a hospital room. But this wasn't the pristine, sterile, private clinic Beatrice had tried to send us to. This was Cook County General. The walls were scuffed, the linoleum floors worn, and the air smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was the scent of a place where ordinary people came to survive, not a place meant for hiding people away. Don't move just yet, Luke. You've got a severe concussion. The voice came from a chair in the corner. It was Harrison Thorne. My attorney looked like he had just escaped a combat zone himself. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and there was a smudge of grease on his cheek, likely from helping pull me from the wreckage. but his eyes were sharp and alert. "Where is she, Harrison?" I asked, my voice raspy, throat feeling like it was full of sand. "Where's Emily?" "She's in the ICU down the hall," Harrison said, standing up to pour me a cup of water. "She's alive, Luke. You saved her." The state police took control of the scene. Because of the fire and the crash, they bypassed the private transport protocols and brought everyone here. This is a county hospital. Beatrice has no friends here, no doctors on her payroll, and no board members to pull strings. I took the water, my hand shaking so badly it spilled onto my gown. I drank it down in one gulp. "Is she safe?" "For now," Harrison said. "While you were out, I met with a night court judge about an hour ago. I showed him the GPS data and the photos from the crash site. I argued that the transfer was an attempt to evade jurisdiction. The judge granted an emergency 24-hour protective order. No one is allowed in her room except medical staff and legal counsel. Not Derek, not Beatrice, only us. You know how she is, Dad." I'd let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. 24 hours. It wasn't a total victory, but it was a lifeline. It gave us time to find the truth. "I need to see the doctor," I said, swinging the blanket off my legs. The room bunched violently, but I gripped the mattress until it settled. Harrison placed a hand on my shoulder. The attending is a Dr. Aris. He's sharp and completely independent. He's running a full toxicology screen right now. The standard panel: opioids, amphetamines, alcohol. "No," I interrupted. "You know how she is, Dad," shifting my legs to the edge of the bed. The standard panel isn't enough. They'll just find the opioids Beatrice fed her, and they'll stop looking. They'll write her off as someone with an addiction and close the case. I looked down at my flannel shirt. The nurses had cut it open to check my chest, but it was still near my shoulder. I grabbed the fabric near my shoulder. Clinging to the dark plaid material were strands of hair, long, brown strands. Emily's hair. When I had lifted her from the van, it had come out in clumps. "Harrison," I said, my voice cracking. "You know how she is, Dad." I barely touched her head, and her hair came ohewe in my hands. She's 34 years old. She isn't undergoing chemotherapy. Opioids don't cause your hair to fall out, and heroin doesn't cause neurological pain so intense it makes you lose consciousness. I remembered the expression on her face back in that bedroom, the way her fingers had curled into claws, the way she had gasped silently when the nurse injected her. That wasn't a high. That was agony. "Get the doctor," I commanded. "Right now." 5 minutes later, Dr. Aris walked in. He was a young man with deep circles under his eyes, looking exhausted but focused. He held a clipboard. "Mr. Harrington, you need to rest. You have 3 broken ribs and a head injury." I ignored the warning. "Doctor, tell me about my daughter's hair loss." Dr. Aris paused. "We noticed the hair loss while cleaning her up. It's diffuse shedding, quite severe. We also noted Mies lines on her fingernails, white bands running across the nail beds, and there's neuropathy. You know how she is, Dad. She reacts to painful stimuli even in a deep stupor. Her nerves are highly inflamed." I looked him straight in the eye. "It's heavy metal poisoning." Dr. Aris frowned, checking his charts. "We're running the standard heavy metal screen. Lead, mercury, arsenic. Test for thallium," I said. The doctor stopped writing. He slowly raised his head. "Thallium? That's extremely rare. It's been banned for decades. It's been banned. It used to be in old rat poisons and insecticides. Why would you suspect thallium?" "Because it's completely tasteless and odorless," I said, my mind racing back to a conversation I had overheard months ago at a dinner party Beatrice hosted. You know how she is, Dad. She had been boasting about how she rid her guest house of an infestation using some old supplies her husband kept in the basement since the 70s. You know how she is, Dad. She called it an old school remedy because, unless you explicitly look for it, nobody ever tests for it. Because it causes hair loss. You know how she is, Dad. And because it causes neurological damage that looks like a psychological breakdown. Test for thallium, Doctor. Please. Dr. Aris stared at me for a long moment, weighing my desperation against my clarity. Finally, he nodded. I'll add it to the panel. We'll have the results in an hour. That next hour was the longest of my life. I sat in a wheelchair outside Emily's room, staring at her through the glass. She looked so small in that bed, surrounded by tubes, her breathing managed by a machine. I wanted to go in and hold her hand, but I was afraid she might break. Suddenly, the double doors at the end of the hall burst open. The quiet of the ward was shattered by a shrill, familiar voice. I demand to see my daughter-in-law. Get your hands off me. Do you know who I am? Beatrice came storming down the hallway. She was still wearing her silk robe, but had thrown a trench coat over it. Her hair was a mess, her eyes frantic. Trailing behind her was Derek, shuffling like a defeated dog, a splint and tape across his broken nose. Security guards tried to block her, but she shoved their hands away. There she is, Beatrice shrieked, pointing at Emily's room. She's a danger to herself. You have no right to hold her. I am her legal guardian. You know how she is, Dad. I wheeled myself into the center of the hallway, blocking her path. You're not her guardian yet, Beatrice, I said, my voice low and dangerous, and you never will be. You know how she is, Dad. Beatrice stopped. She looked down at me, battered and bloodied in the wheelchair, and let out a sneer. You should have stayed out of it, old man. You know how she is, Dad. You've destroyed property and interfered with her care. My lawyers are drafting the paperwork right now. Harrison stepped out from behind me. And I have a court order, Beatrice. Step back, or you'll be arrested for contempt. Beatrice let out a sharp, brittle laugh. A court order based on the fabrications of an unstable old man? My son is her husband. He has the right to make her medical decisions. You know how she is, Dad. We are transferring her to Serene Hills, where she can receive proper care, not keeping her in a place like this. Dr. Aris stepped out from the nurse's station. You know how she is, Dad. He held a printed report in his hand, his face pale. He looked at me, then at Beatrice, his expression turning stern. Mrs. Worth, the doctor said, his voice cutting through the noise, no one is transferring this patient anywhere. Beatrice turned her anger on him. Who do you think you are? I want to speak to your superior. I am the chief toxicologist on duty, Dr. Aris said, taking a step closer. You know how she is, Dad, and I just received the mass spectrometry results. He held up the paper. Yes, we found high levels of opioids. But we found something else. The patient's blood contains a critical level of thallium. The hallway went completely silent. Even the beeping of the monitors seemed to pause. Thallium. Dr. Aris continued, his eyes locked onto Beatrice. This is a slow-acting poison. Based on the accumulation in her hair and nails, she has been ingesting it for at least 3 months. This isn't an overdose, and it isn't a self-harm attempt. This is a deliberate poisoning. I looked at Derek. His face an ashen gray. His face turned an ashen gray. Beatrice froze. For a fraction of a second, I saw terror in her eyes. The mask had slipped. She knew she was caught. The science didn't lie. She had been mixing the poison into Emily's food, insisting on personally administering special vitamins. It was all laid bare right there on that page. But Beatrice Worth was a survivor. She was a predator who knew how to sever her own ties to escape a trap. She didn't deny it. She didn't confess either. Instead, her face contorted. "You know how she is, Dad." And she let out a sob that sounded almost completely genuine. She grabbed Derek's arm, wailing, "Oh my God, Derek, I told you. I told you she was more unwell than we realized. You know how she is, Dad?" She turned to the doctor, tears streaming down her face. "Doctor, you have to save her. My poor Emily, she's been so depressed. She told me last week she wanted to end it all. She must have found that old pest control supply in the garden shed." She did this to herself. My jaw dropped. I stared at her in utter disbelief. A self-harm attempt? Beatrice wept loudly, making sure the entire ward could hear. Her mental state was so fragile to ingest poison like that. Oh, my poor girl. She looked at me through her tears, and behind that false sorrow, her eyes were like cold stone. "You see, Lucas," she said softly, "this just proves she's unstable. Who else would ingest poison? Who else ingest poison? For her own safety, she needs to be placed in an institution for the rest of her days." I gripped the armrest. I gripped the armrests of my wheelchair so hard the metal began to warp. Beatrice was spinning the truth into a noose and trying to slip it in tension of my daughter's neck. She had no intention of going to prison. She was going to use this poison as the final nail in the coffin, L for Emily's sanity. He'd laughed about it. While Beatrice was busy delivering the performance of her life in that hospital hallway, screaming about her rights and shedding crocodile tears, I quietly slipped away. I didn't return to my hospital bed. I headed down to the parking lot where a running black sedan was waiting for me. Behind the wheel was Frank Miller. You know how she is, Dad. The private investigator Harrison had hired while I was unconscious. Frank was an ex-cop with eyes that didn't miss a thing, known for slipping into places that were supposed to be completely impenetrable. We drove back to the Worth estate in silence. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a gray light over the city, but inside the car, my mind was in complete darkness. "Sat how she is, Dad." I sat clutching my side, every bump in the road, sending a fresh wave of agony through my broken ribs. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the cold fury burning is inside me. I know how she is. I knew what kind of poison was in my daughter's blood. Now, I needed to find the bottle. I needed to find the reason why they did this. You know how she is, Dad, and I had to get to it before Beatrice could destroy the evidence. You know how she is, Dad. The mansion loomed ahead, dark and quiet. The police tape from earlier was still fluttering in the breeze across the shattered front entrance. How she is. But the house itself looked deserted. Beatrice was at the hospital, and Derek was with her. The staff had likely been sent home to keep them from witnessing the drama. The place was empty. Or at least, it was supposed to be. We didn't use the front door this time. I knew the lose of this house. I knew the layout of the first bought it. I had looked over the blueprints when the family first bought it, even though they hadn't listened to my advice about the foundation. I knew there was a service entrance around the back near the garage, used by caterers and cleaners. It took Frank all of 10 seconds to pick the lock. He'd laughed about it. You know how she is, Dad. We slipped inside, stepping into the mudroom. The air in the house was still and freezing, smelling of expensive polish, and the lingering scent of the waitress had spilled. You know how she is, Dad. We moved silently through the kitchen, avoiding the broken glass that still littered the main foyer. We need to find Derek's office, I whispered. Beatrice calls the shots. You know how she is, but Derek handles the money. If they were this desperate for that trust, the answer is in his files Tuesday. We took the back stairs, the ones meant for the staff. Derek's office was on the second floor. You know how she is, Dad. Just down the hall from the master bedroom where I had found Emily. The door was shut. I turned the handle. Locked. Of course. Frank stepped up, using a tension wrench, and with a soft click, the door swung open. You know how she is, Dad. If the rest of the house was a perfect showroom, Derek's office was a disaster zone. Papers were scattered everywhere. Folders were piled high on the floor. He laughed about it. The mahogany desk was littered with takeout boxes. The room smelled of stale cigars and desperation. This was the room of a man losing his grip. You know how she is, Dad. Frank went to work on the filing cabinets while I walked over to the desk. Shoving aside the empty coffee cups, I started sorting through the documents. It didn't take long to find the truth. It wasn't hidden. It was sitting right on the surface, practically screaming for attention. Here, I said, holding up a stack of letters stamped with bold red ink. Foreclosure notices. Not just one, but 3. The bank had already initiated proceedings to seize the mansion 2 months ago. I kept digging. Pulling open the top drawer, I found a leather-bound ledger filled with handwritten notes, names, and numbers. They weren't business contacts. They were bookies, offshore sports betting sites, you know how she is, and high-stakes poker debts. I did the math in my head, adding up the margins. My hands began to shake. You know how she is, Dad? Derek wasn't just broke, he was drowning in nearly $2 million of debt. Frank let out a low whistle from across the room. Luke, look at this. He held up a letter from a private lending firm based out of Las Vegas. The date was from a week ago. The language was polite, but the underlying threat was unmistakable. You know how she is, Dad. Payment expected in full by the 1st of the month. You know how she is, Dad. Failure to clear balances will result in alternative collection methods. Beatrice had leveraged everything to maintain her socialite lifestyle, and Derek had gambled away the rest, trying to win it back. They were completely underwater. They were penniless. Then I saw the calendar on the wall. You know how she is, Dad. Emily's 35th birthday was circled in thick red ink. Next to it, someone had written, Freedom Day. Everything clicked into place. They didn't hate Emily, they just needed her gone. They needed Hal to declared incompetent gone. They needed her $1 million trust fund. That money so they could access her $5 million trust fund. That money was the only thing standing between from the lenders. They were using my keeping Derek from the lend the streets. They were using my daughter to settle a gambling debt. They were using my daughter's life to settle a gambling. A wave of nauseas, Dad. A wave of nausea hit me, and I leaned against the desk, fighting the urge to be sick. I looked down at the trash can next to the chair. It was stuffed with shredded paper, but something at the very top caught my eye. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a page torn from a notebook. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Emily's. The neat, rounded script she'd had since she was a little girl. I reached into the bin, pulled out the crumpled ball of paper, and smoothed it out on the desk. It was a page from her journal, dated 3 days ago. You know how she is, Dad. Reading the words tore my heart to pieces. I feel so tired today. My hair came out in clumps again in the shower. I showed Derek, but he just said, I'm letting my stress get to me. Beatrice made me that special soup for lunch. She stood there and watched me finish every spoonful. She says it's an old herbal remedy for mental clarity. It tastes so bitter, but I drink it because I want to be a good wife. I want to get better. But why do my hands hurt so much? Why do I feel like I'm burning from the inside? I stared at the paper, the special soup, the bitter taste. Thallium is tasteless. Thallium is tasteless, but in high doses it leaves a metallic tang. Beatrice had been right here in this house, personally feeding it to her, watching my daughter consume the poison and calling it love. "Frank," I said, my voice trembling, "we have it. We have the motive, and we have the method. You know how she is, Dad?" Frank walked over and took photos of the journal page with his phone, followed by the foreclosure notices and the ledger. "This is enough for a warrant, Luke," he said. "You know how she is, Dad. This connects every single dot. The financial desperation, the timeline, the poisoning. We need to get this to the police immediately." "You know how she is, Dad." I folded the journal page and put it in my pocket. I wasn't leaving it behind. "You know how she is, Dad." This was Emily's voice. This was her testimony from the edge of the grave. We turned to leave, having found exactly what we came for. Suddenly, from outside the window, "You know how she is, Dad," we heard the sound of gravel crunching, a car pulling into the driveway. Frank froze, stepping over to the window to peer through the blinds. "A car just pulled up," he whispered. "It's a silver Porsche." Derek. My stomach dropped. Why was he here? He was supposed to be at the hospital with his mother, maintaining their act, unless he came back to destroy something, unless he knew we might come looking. We heard the front door open downstairs. The alarm didn't trip because he had the code. Mom said to clear it out. Derek's voice drifted up the stairwell. He was on the phone, his tone frantic and manic. "Yes, I'm doing it now. I'm grabbing the hard drives and the paperwork. If the police get a warrant, they'll find the ledgers. I know. I'm moving as fast as I can." He was coming up the stairs, heading straight for this room. We were trapped. The back staircase was across the hallway. If we walked out now, "You know how she is, Dad," we'd run right into him. "Hide," Frank hissed. There was nowhere to go. The desk was open underneath. The curtains were too thin. The closet. It was a massive, Dad? Walk-in closet filled with Derek's designer suits and shoes. We ducked inside, pulling the door shut until only a tiny crack remained. The darkness of the closet enveloped us. I held my breath, pressing my hand against my bruised ribs to keep from making a sound. I could hear Derek's footsteps. Footsteps heavy and hurried against the hardwood floor. He burst into the office, and through the crack in the door, I could see a small section of the room. He looked like a man possessed, his nose bandaged and his eyes wild. He threw his phone onto the sofa and ran to the desk. He started shoving papers into a black duffel bag, then yanked open the drawer where the ledger had been kept. He stopped. He froze. I'd left it messy, moving the papers inside. He knew. Messy, moving the papers around, scanning the room. His hand flew to his waistband, and he pulled out a small, black handgun. "Oh. Who's in here? Who's in here?" he screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "I know someone's in here! Come out!" I looked at Frank in the darkness. Frank placed a finger to his lips and slowly reached into his jacket, touching his own weapon. Derek took a step toward the closet, raising the gun and pointing it directly at the door where we were hiding. I counted the heartbeats in my head. 1, 2, 3. If he opened that door, it was going to be a confrontation. And I was unarmed, injured, and cornered in the dark, facing the man, closet door, who had tried to end my daughter's life. That closet door was the only thing standing between us and a bullet. But I knew one thing about Derek Worth, something he didn't even know about himself. He was a coward. You know how she is, Dad. A man who pulls a gun on an empty room is terrified of what's hiding in the shadows. He wasn't a killer. He was just a desperate gambler. And right now, he was trying to bluff his way out of a terrible hand. I looked at Frank in the dark. I signaled for him to keep his weapon ready, but to let me handle this. I wasn't going to shoot my way out. I wasn't going to shoot my way out. He'd laughed about it. I was going to speak to Derek in the only language he truly understood, money and fear. I pushed the closet door open. Derek spun around, letting out a sharp, startled yelp. You know how she is, Dad. He aimed the small black handgun right at my chest, his hand shaking so violently the barrel was moving in circles. Back off, he screamed, his eyes wide and bloodshot. I'll shoot. I swear to God, I'll shoot. I stepped out of the closet. I didn't raise my hands, and I didn't look at the gun. I looked straight into his eyes, gunmine, as if it were his eyes. Ignoring the weapon as if it were a toy, I walked directly toward the desk, covered in the evidence of his ruin. Go ahead and shoot, Derek. My voice was flat and steady. End my life. Add another charge to your list. You're already facing prison for fraud, embezzlement, embezzlement, and illegal gambling. What's one more count? Derek blinked, completely thrown off by my lack of fear. He lowered the gun slightly. What are you talking about? I picked up the foreclosure notice from the bank, holding it up so he could see the bold red ink. I know everything, Derek, I said. I know about the $2 million you owe out in Vegas. I know the bank is taking this house in 30 days. I know you cleared out the joint savings account 3 months ago. You aren't grieving for your wife. You're broke, you're cornered, and you're using Emily's life to pay off your debts. Derek's face drained of color. You know how she is, Dad, and the barrel of the gun dropped even lower. How did you get that? That's private. Private? I let out a harsh, dry laugh. You lost your right to privacy when you started poisoning my daughter. I saw the calendar, Derek. Freedom Day. That's what you called her birthday, right? Huh? The day the trust fund unlocks. $5 million, just enough to clear your debts and keep you and your mother in this fake palace. I took a step toward him. How she is, Dad. He took a step back, his knees hitting the edge of the sofa. Does Beatrice know you gambled everything away? I asked, turning the screws. Or is this your little secret? You know how she is, Dad. Does Mommy know her golden boy ruined the family fortune while she was busy hosting charity galas? Derek broke. It was pathetic to watch. The arrogance vanished, leaving only a terrified boy. He dropped the gun onto the sofa and buried his face in his hands. She knows, he sobbed. She knows everything. It was her idea. I froze. I looked at Frank, who was standing by the closet door, holding up his phone, capturing every single word on video. Say that again, Derek, I commanded. Whose idea was it? Derek looked up, tears mixing with the fluid dripping from his broken nose. My mother, Beatrice. She found out about my debts 6 months ago. My mother, she found out about my debts 6 months ago. The lenders threatened to hurt me. They threatened to burn this house down. I wanted to confess to Emily. I wanted to ask her for help, but my mother said no. She said Emily would leave me, that she'd divorce me and take the trust fund, and we'd be left with nothing. He was shaking all over now, his body trembling from the weight of the confession. Mom said there was another way. She found that old pest control supply in the shed. Thallium. You know how she is, Dad. She looked it up online. She said, if we gave it to her in small doses, it would look like an autoimmune illness or a breakdown. You know how she is, Dad. She said we just needed her to be incapacitated by her birthday. Dad. We just needed to get the power of attorney. A cold chill ran down my spine. I had suspected it, but hearing him confirm it was chilling. Beatrice wasn't just an accomplice. She was the mastermind. So, you just went along with it, I spat. You watched your wife lose her hair. You watched her scream in agony, and you did nothing. Derek wiped his nose with his sleeve. I was terrified. How she is, Dad. Mom said it was the only way to save the family. She said Emily wouldn't pass away. She said she'd just be confused. Just confused. You know how she is, Dad. I wanted to take that gun and finish what I had started earlier, but I held back. I needed him alive. I needed this recording. Frank stepped forward, his phone still rolling. We've got it, Luke. A recorded confession of conspiracy and attempted murder. It's over. I looked at Derek with pure disgust. You're going to prison, Derek. But if you testify against your mother, if you tell the police exactly what you just told us, maybe a judge will show you a shred of mercy. It's over. For a second, Derek looked relieved, the relief of a weak man finally allowed to stop fighting. He nodded slowly. Okay, I'll tell them. I can't do this anymore. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face. The room fell completely silent. We had won. We had the evidence, the motive, and the confession. I reached for the journal page on the desk, preparing to leave. Buzz. A phone on the coffee table vibrated. It was Derek's. The screen lit up with that text message, and Derek instinctively glanced down at it, picking it up. You know how she is, Dad. I watched the transformation happen in real time. It was like watching a dark entity take over a body. He finished reading the message, and his tears stopped instantly. His posture straightened, and the fear in his eyes vanished, replaced by a sudden, manic energy. He began to laugh, a low chuckle at first, then a chilling, hysterical laugh. What's so funny? I asked, taking a step closer. Derek turned the phone screen toward me. The text was from his mother. It was brief. Judge Reynolds taken care of. Hearing moved up to tomorrow morning. You know how she is, Dad. Emergency guardianship granted. Don't worry, sweet boy. We won. Derek looked at me and grinned, a bloody, unhinged smile. You don't understand how the world works, do you, old man? He sneered. You think the truth matters? You think evidence matters? My mother controls this town. She just bought the judge. He lunged for the landline on the desk. I tried to stop him, but he was fast. You know how she is, Dad, fueled by a sudden burst of confidence. He punched in 3 numbers, 911. He screamed into the receiver, his eyes locked onto mine. You know how she is, Dad. I need the police at the Worth estate immediately. My father-in-law broke in again. He has a weapon. He's holding me hostage. Please hurry. He's trying to kill me. He slammed the phone down, looking at me with triumph. They're already on their way, Lucas, he laughed. And this time, there really is a gun in the room. When they find you here with my handgun, they'll end it right here. Who's going to believe a dead man? Frank grabbed my arm. Lucas, we have to go right now. We have the recording. We have the journal. If we stay here, we aren't making it out. I took one last look at Derek. He wasn't a son. He was a monster created by a monster. I'll see you in court, I said. I grabbed the journal page and started to run. We didn't go back down the stairs. We could hear the sirens approaching in the distance. Close. Too close. The window, I yelled. You know how she is, Dad. We ran to the massive bay window overlooking the backyard. We were on the second floor, a 20-foot drop to the stone patio below. Frank glanced down, hesitating. Lucas, your ribs. You won't survive that jump. I didn't have a choice. I grabbed a heavy brass lamp from a side table and smashed it through the glass. The pane shattered outward, raining shards into the garden below. Go! Go! I roared at Frank. Frank climbed out, hanging from the ledge by his fingers for a split second before letting go. He hit the lawn, rolled, and looked up. Come on. I climbed onto the sill, the wind rushing against my face, my side screaming in agony. I could hear the police cars screeching to a halt at the main gates. You know how she is, Dad. I could hear heavy boots slamming against the front door. I looked back toward the office door where Derek stood laughing, goodbye. Waving goodbye. I jumped. The fall felt hard, my bad knee buckling, and a white-hot flash of pain tore through my chest as my broken ribs ground against each other. I rolled with the impact, biting my tongue to keep from screaming, tasting copper in my mouth. Ski. Frank was there instantly, pulling me to my feet. Run! Luke, run! We scrambled over the garden wall just as the police kicked in the front door of the mansion. We tore through neighbors' yards, ducking under hedges and scaling fences, not stopping until we reached Frank's car 3 blocks away. I collapsed into the passenger seat, gasping for air, clutching the crumpled journal page tightly against my chest. Frank started the engine, accelerating into the morning traffic. We have the confession on video, Frank breathed. But if the judge is in their pocket, we have to fight them somewhere they can't buy, I said, watching the city blur past the window. We take this fight into the public eye. The battle for my daughter's life was moving out of the shadows and into the courtroom, and I was bringing a wrecking ball. Frank drove us to a wrecking ball. Frank drove us to a neighborhood that felt like a completely different world from the manicured lawns and iron gates of the Worth estate. The houses here were crammed shoulder to shoulder, chain-link fences rusting in the damp morning air. We were looking for Rosa Martinez, Beatrice's former housekeeper, who had worked for her for 10 years until she was abruptly fired 2 weeks ago. Frank had tracked down her address while I was in the hospital, and she was our last-spital, and she was our last hope. You know how she is, Dad. We had the journal and a forced confession, which Derek would undoubtedly recant the second he got a lawyer. But we needed a witness who could stand before a judge and look Beatrice straight in the eye. My body screamed in protest as I climbed out of the car. The drop from the sun had caused my bad knee to swell into a painful mess, and every breath felt like a jagged knife cutting into my broken ribs. You know how she is, Dad. But pain was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. I limped up the cracked concrete path leading to Rosa's small house, Frank a few paces behind me, his hand near his jacket, keeping watch for any signs of law enforcement. I knocked on the peeling front door. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then I heard the sound of a deadbolt sliding back and a chain rattling. The door opened a few inches and a dark eye peered out suspiciously. Rosa, I said, my voice raspy. I'm Lucas Harrington, Emily's father. The eye widened in recognition, followed instantly by terror. She tried how she is, Dad. She tried to slam the door, but I was ready. I wedged my work boot into the gap, gritting my teeth against sharp pain that shot up my leg from the impact. Please, Rosa, I pleaded, leaning against the wood. I just need to talk to you. They're destroying her. Go away, Mr. Harrington. Go away, Mr. Harrington, Rosa hissed, her voice trembling. Beatrice told me if I ever spoke to you, she'd make sure I never worked in this city again. She knows people in immigration. She said she'd have my whole family removed. You know how she is, Dad. I pushed harder against the door, ignoring the agony. Beatrice is going to prison, Rosa. She can't hurt you anymore. But I need your help to put her there. Please, for Emily. You raised her more than Beatrice ever did. The mention of Emily made her hesitate, and the pressure on the door eased. I took the opportunity to push it open gently, stepping into the dim, cramped living room. The air smelled of bleach and cooking oil, and a small shrine in the corner flickered with religious candles. Rosa stood there in her house clothes, wringing her hands. You know how she is, Dad, looking like a woman torn between her conscience and survival. "Oh, I won't go to court," she said, shaking her head frantically. "I can't fight the Worth family. They have money, they have power. I'm just a maid. They'll crush me like a bug." I sat down heavily on her worn florals, Dad. I tar kassan earl your worn floral sofa, my legs simply unable to support me any longer. Looking up at this terrified woman, I knew threats wouldn't work, and neither would money. You know how she is, Dad. Only the truth would matter. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened the gallery. I found the photo I had taken in the ambulance right after pulling Emily from the fire. In the image, you know how she is, Dad. My daughter looked like a ghost. Her skin was a dull gray, her hair matted and missing in large patches, her lips cracked and blue. It was a devastating image. You know how she is, Dad, one that tore at me every time I looked at it. I handed the phone to Rosa. "Look at her, Rosa," I said softly. Rosa refused to look, turning her head away. "I don't want to see." "Look at her," I commanded, my voice cracking with emotion. "You were there when she moved in. You were there when she got married. You cooked for her. You ironed her clothes. You know how healthy she was, how happy she was. Look at what they did to her in 3 months." Rosa slowly turned her head, her gaze falling on the screen. She let out a sharp gasp, clapping a hand over her mouth. Tears welled up in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Miss Emily, my poor girl." "That wasn't an illness, Rosa," I said, leaning closer. "That was thallium. Rat poison. The exact stuff kept in the basement. Not." Rosa collapsed into the armchair across from me, burying her face in her hands. "I knew it," she wept. "I knew something was wrong. You know how she is? Beatrice made me prepare that special soup for lunch every single day. She brought me the herbs herself from a sealed jar, claiming it was an old remedy for fertility. But one day, I accidentally dropped the jar. The powder smelled entirely mechanical. It didn't smell like herbs at all. When I tried to clean it up, Beatrice screamed at me. She called me stupid and let me go on the spot. You know how she is, Dad. I waited for her crying to subside before asking the most crucial question. "Will you testify, Rosa? Will you tell a judge about the powder? You know how she is, Dad, and how she controlled everything Emily ate." Rosa raised her tear-stained eyes and shook her head slowly. "It's just my word against hers, Mr. Harrington. Beatrice will say, I'm a disgruntled employee lying out of spite. A judge will believe a wealthy lady in a Chanel suit over a maid. You need evidence. Real evidence." I leaned back against the sofa. She was right. Without physical proof, Rosa's testimony would be dismantled by Beatrice's lawyers. We needed something her eyes with as undeniable. For the first time, with the sleeve of her robe, for the first time, the fear in her eyes was replaced by a look of profound indignation. "She's a monster," Rosa said. "She doesn't trust anyone, not even her son. You know how she is, Dad. She thinks everyone is stealing from her, which is why she monitors everything." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "She monitors everything." Rosa leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a whisper. "The cameras." My heart skipped a beat. "What cameras?" "Rosa, I've been to that house 100 times. I've never seen a single camera inside. You know how she is, Dad. They aren't meant to be seen," Rosa explained. Laughed about it. "Beatrice installed them 2 years ago. After she misplaced a diamond earring and blamed the catering staff, she put them everywhere. In the hallways, the living room, the kitchen. The kitchen. The kitchen." I sat up straight, completely ignoring the painful protest from my ribs. "Where in the kitchen?" "Inside the smoke detector," Rosa said. They are micro pinhole cameras. You know how she is, Dad. She watches the staff to make sure we aren't taking food or silverware. She sees everything that happens at the island. The island. That was where the food was prepared. That was where the soup was made. If Beatrice mixed the substance into the food at that island, if she stood in that kitchen preparing those bowls for Emily, the camera saw it. It saw everything. Does it record? I asked, my pulse quickening, or is it just a live feed? It records, Rosa nodded. I know because she once showed me footage of my break running 5 minutes long. She saves everything. She's a control freak. The footage is kept on a server. Where is the server, Rosa? Where does she keep it? Rosa hesitated, looking at Frank by the door. You know how she is, Dad. Then back at me. In the wine cellar, she said. Behind the racks of vintage French wine, there is a hidden panel in the wall. It opens with a keypad. Behind it is a small room where the safe and the computer servers are kept. It's a closed system. It's not connected to the internet, so it can't be hacked. You have to be physically there to get it. I closed my eyes. The wine cellar. Of course. Beatrice loved her vintage collection almost as much as she loved money. I looked at Frank. He checked his watch, his face grim. Luke, he said, it's 5 p.m. The court hearing is tomorrow morning at 9. If we don't have that footage by the time the judge gavels the session to order, Beatrice wins. She gets guardianship, she gets the trust fund. She gets the trust fund, and Emily disappears into serene hills forever. I stood up, my knee buckling slightly before I caught myself on the arm of the sofa. We have to go back, I said. Frank looked at me like I had lost my mind. Back where? To the mansion. Luke, the place is compromised. Derek is there, and Beatrice will be heading back from the hospital soon. It's a fortress. You can barely walk, let alone break into a secured estate for the second time in 24 hours. I turned to Rosa. Thank you. You just saved her life. Rosa reached out and grabbed my hand with surprising strength. Be careful, Mr. Harrington, she said. The code for that keypad. You know how she is, Dad. I saw her enter it once when she was showing off her collection. It's her birthday. I nodded, etching the information into my mind. I walked out of the house and into the fading light. The sun was setting, marking the end of the most violent day of my life, but there would be no sleep tonight. Frank, start the car. You have a plan, right? He asked as we pulled a one-way trip. Because right now, this sounds like a one-way trip. You know how she is, Dad? I looked out the window at the darkening city streets. I don't have a plan, Frank, I said. I have a pair of bolt cutters and a daughter to save. That's enough. You know how she is, Dad. We drove toward a hardware store. I needed some gear. Tonight, I wasn't going as a father. I was going as a ghost. I was going to retrieve the truth from that basement. You know how she is, Dad, even if I had to tear the house down to do it. You know how she is, Dad. We parked a block away from the Worth estate, hidden under the shadow of a weeping willow that blocked the streetlights. The first floor of the mansion was brightly lit, but the perimeter was dead. Dark. The police cars were gone, replaced by an unphysical private security patrol vehicle parked near the main gates. It was a false sense of security. They thought the threat had been neutralized. They thought I was running for my life. They thought I was never imagining I would walk straight back into the lion's den. Frank sat in the driver's seat, balancing a laptop on his thighs. The glow of the screen cast a blue, ghostly light across his face. His fingers flew across the keyboard. I'm in their subnet, Luke, he whispered without looking up. The security system is top tier, but the firewall hasn't been updated in 6 months. Typical wealthy homeowners spending millions on hardware and nothing on maintenance. I can loop the camera footage for 10 minutes. That's your window. After 10 minutes, the system resets and realizes it's reading a ghost image. I check my watch. 10 minutes. You know how she is, Dad. That was barely enough time to make a sandwich, let alone retrieve a server from a reinforced basement. But it was all I had. I'm going in, I said, pushing the car door open. Frank grabbed my wrist. Luke, if you get caught this time, there is no bail. No lawyer can save you. They'll bury you beneath the prison. I looked at the mansion. You know how she is, Dad. They're already trying to bury my daughter, Frank. I have nothing left to lose. I slipped into the night, moving through the shadows of the neighboring hedges, my work boots silent against the damp grass. Every breath sent a burning ache through my ribs, a constant reminder of the fall I'd taken earlier. I reached the side of the house near the garage. The service door was there, just where Rosa said it would be. You know how she is, Dad. Frank's voice crackled in my earpiece. Camera, loop is live. You're invisible. Move. I picked the lock on the service door, my hands steady now as adrenaline completely took over the pain. I slipped inside. The house was quiet, too quiet. I could hear the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I crept past the island, the very spot where Beatrice had prepared those bowls, the very spot prepared those bowls day after day while a hidden camera watched from above. It was a heavy, solid oak door. I pushed it open slowly, praying the hinges were lubricated. Silence. I stepped into the darkness, the air colder with every step down. The scent of the basement hit me. Not dampness, but oak and old money. The wine cellar was at the end of the hall, a climate-controlled vault behind glass walls. I entered the code Rosa gave me into the keypad. The glass door clicked open. Inside, it looked like a museum, rows of bottles that each cost more than my first truck. I walked to the back, searching the racks for the French vintage section Rosa had described. There it was, a wall of dusty Bordeaux. I felt along the wooden frame, searching for his dad. Searched for a seam until my fingers brushed against a small indentation. I pressed it. The entire wine rack slid forward silently, revealing a hidden alcove, how she is, Dad, and inside lay the heart of the operation. You know how she is, Dad. A small server rack sat on a metal shelf humming softly next to a safe. I didn't care about the money or jewelry inside the safe. I know how she is, Dad. I wanted the black box with the blinking green lights, the hard drive, the memory of this house. I reached for the cables connecting the drive to the network. Click, clack, click, clack, the sound of heels against the basement stairs. My blood turned to ice. Someone was coming down. I looked at the hidden door. If I closed it, I'd be trapped in the alcove with no escape if they opened it. If I left it open, they'd see it instantly. I grabbed the hard drive and yanked the cables free, sparks flying as I shoved the drive into my jacket. The footsteps were closer now, moving down the hallway. I shoved the wine rack back into place, but it didn't click completely shut, leaving a tiny gap. I lunged into the corner of the room, hiding behind a stack of wooden crates filled with magnums of champagne. The glass door of the cellar swung open. I held my breath, pressing myself into the shadows. Beatrice. Through the gap in the crates, I saw her, Beatrice. She is, Dad. She was dressed in a silk evening gown, looking as if she were prepared for a gala. She held a crystal goblet in one hand and her phone in the other. She didn't look like a woman in one hand and her daughter-own in the other. She didn't look like a woman whose daughter-in-law was critically ill. She looked like someone who had just won the lottery. She walked straight toward the French wine section. He'd laughed about it. My heart hammered so violently against my ribs. I thought she would hear it. She was inches from the hidden panel, inches from where I was hiding. She reached for a bottle. You know how she is, Dad. Pulling it out to inspect the label, a smile spreading across her face as she brought the phone to her ear. "Yes, Dr. Sterling," she said, her voice smooth. "I know it's late, but we need to discuss the arrangements." She paused, listening. "No," Beatrice said firmly. "Absolutely no autopsy. Derek is the next of kin. He'll sign the waiver. We want an immediate cremation. You know how she is, Dad. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood." Cremation. They weren't just waiting for Emily to fade. They were planning to incinerate the proof. You know how she is. Thallium remains in bone and hair indefinitely, but without a body, there would be no case. Beatrice laughed softly. "Don't worry about the police report, Doctor. Don't worry about the police report, Doctor. The narrative of self-harm is established. It's a tragedy that the girl was unstable. But we must respect the family's wish for closure. I want it done within an hour of the declaration. I'll pay double the usual rate to expedite the paperwork. You know how she is, Dad. She was scheduling the destruction of my daughter's remains like a disposal service." "Yes," Beatrice continued. "And Doctor, ensure the hospital records indicate organ failure due to substance abuse. We can't have any loose ends when the trust auditors review the accounts." She uncorked the bottle, pouring herself a fresh glass out. Taking a long sip, she closed her eyes with satisfaction. "To freedom," she whispered to the empty room. 她转身准备离开，但随后停住了。她皱起了眉头，她看向了那个酒架。那个我推回去的酒架，它稍微有些错位，仅仅是0.几英寸，比阿特丽斯走近了一步。她伸出手去摸那个酒架。Frank's voice exploded in my ear. "Luke, get out of there. The loop is failing. The system reboots in 10 seconds. I didn't have a choice. You know how she is, Dad. I couldn't wait for her to open that rack and realize the hard drive was missing. I stood up from behind the wooden crates. Beatrice spun around, letting out a sharp gasp as her wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor and spilling red liquid across the linoleum. "You!" she hissed, her eyes widening in absolute shock. "Could you get in here?" I stepped out of the shadows, looking like a total nightmare. Bruised, torn, with eyes full of absolute conviction. "I told you, Beatrice. I told you," I said, stepping over the broken glass. "I'm a builder. I know where the cracks are." She opened her mouth to scream, but I didn't give her the chance. You know how she is, Dad. I shoved past her, knocking her back toward the wine rack. Bottles came crashing down around her in a rain of glass and red liquid as she let out a reek loud enough to raise the dead. "Derek! Security! He's in here!" I bolted. You know how she is, Dad. Like I was 20 years younger, tearing out of the cellar, down the hall and up the stairs. The security system burst to life, sirens echoing through the house as the lights began to flash. I burst into the kitchen, hearing heavy footsteps running from the living room. "Security! Freeze!" a voice shouted. I didn't stop. I slammed my shoulder against the service door, bursting out into the cold night air. "Run! Luke!" Frank screamed in my ear. "Run!" I vaulted the perimeter fence, ignoring the tearing pain in my knee. I could hear dogs barking now. They had released the security hounds. Holding the hard drive tight against my chest, I sprinted the panting through the neighboring yards, hearing the panting of a dog close behind. I saw Frank's car idling at the corner, the passenger door flung wide open. I dove into the car just as a German shepherd lunged at my heels. Frank slammed on the gas, tires screaming as we tore away, leaving the Worth estate behind in a storm of sirens and flashing lights. I slumped into the seat, my chest heaving as I pulled the black box from my jacket. The green lights were still blinking. "We got it," I gasped. "We have the drive." Frank looked at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes wide. "You're an absolute maniac, Luke. Out of your mind." I looked at the drive. "I'm not crazy, Frank. I'm a father, and tomorrow morning, Beatrice Worth is going to watch her world burn." The courtroom was like a theater, and Beatrice Worth was the undisputed star of the show. She hadn't just brought her legal team, she had invited the world. The gallery was packed with reporters, bloggers, and socialites who had come to watch either the fall of the Worth family or the public undoing of a desperate old man. Camera flashes went off whenever anyone moved, despite the judge's orders. The air was thick with expensive perfume, and that sharp, tense atmosphere of a high-stakes trial. You know how she is, Dad. I sat at the defense table, Harrison next to me. I wore a suit Frank had brought for me, but beneath the white shirt, my chest was wrapped tightly in bandages, making me feel like I was held together by wire. I looked defeated, swollen, limping, with my head down. To the world, I was the villain, the violent father who had assaulted a grieving family and caused a highway crash. Beatrice had woven her lies perfectly. Judge Reynolds sat high on the bench looking down at me with disdain. He had a bulldog face and a reputation for being agreeable if the price was right. I saw him glance toward Beatrice, offering a tiny, imperceptible nod. The verdict had been decided before I even walked through the door. This wasn't a hearing. You know how it was a coronation for Beatrice and a funeral for me. The petitioner calls Dr. Arthur Sterling to the stand, Beatrice's lawyer announced. He was a sleek man with an unnaturally wide smile. Dr. Sterling walked to the stand with the confidence of a man who believed his own fabrications. He watched his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. I watched him, a fire burning in my stomach. This was the man who had tried to arrange a cremation while my daughter was still clinging to life. "Dr. Sterling, please describe," Emily Rickert, the lawyer, requested. Sterling adjusted his glasses, looking grave. "Mrs. Worth suffers from severe paranoid schizophrenia complicated by acute substance dependency. You know how she is, Dad. Over the past 3 months, her self-harm tendencies escalated dramatically. This thallium ingestion was entirely self-inflicted. A tragic cry for help. She consumed the pust control supply because, in her delusional state, she believed she needed to rid herself of internal toxins. You know how she is, Dad." A low murmur ran through the gallery as reporters took notes furiously. "And in your professional opinion, Doctor," the lawyer continued, is Mr. Lucas Harrington capable of providing care for her?" Sterling looked at me, shaking his head with a show of sorrow. "Absolutely not. Is a violent man with a history of ignoring medical advice. His actions, the night of the incident, nearly cost his daughter her life. He dragged a critical patient from a transport vehicle, causing a collision. He is a danger to her and to society. Emily requires professional institutional care. She needs serene hills." "Thank you, Doctor." Harrison leaned over to me. "Stay steady, Luke. Let them pile it high. The higher they build it, the harder it falls." "You know how she is, Dad." I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white, wanting to stand up and shout about the syringe, about the look in Sterling's eyes when he realized I knew about the substance, but I remained silent. I was the builder waiting for the structure to give way. Next came the main event. Beatrice Worth. She took the stand, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. You know how she is, Dad. She wore a modest black dress that cost more than my truck, looking fragile, like a saint pushed to her absolute limit. Mrs. Worth, her lawyer asked gently, you know how she is, Dad. Tell us about your relationship with your daughter-in-law. Beatrice sniffled, looking toward the gallery with tearful eyes. I loved her like my own flesh and blood, she began, her voice trembling perfectly. When she married Derek, I welcomed she is, Dad. I welcomed her with open arms. I knew she had struggles. Her mother passed when she was young, and I tried to fill that void. I cooked for her, took her to appointments, and sat by her bed when the voices became too loud. She paused, wiping away a tear. And how did her father react to your assistance? The lawyer asked, pointing toward me. Beatrice's expression hardened. He was envious. He couldn't handle Emily relying on us. He became paranoid, stalking us and breaking into our home. He actually accused me of harming her. Me, the woman who prepared her meals every single day. She turned to the judge, raising her hands in despair. Your Honor, I have spent our resources trying to save that girl. You know how she is, Dad. We are on the brink of financial ruin because of her medical costs, and yet this man accuses me of wanting to harm her. It breaks my heart. I just want to keep her safe in a facility where she can get the help she needs. Please, don't let him take her. He'll destroy her. The gallery erupted into sympathetic whispers. You know how she is, Dad. I heard someone behind me mutter the word monster directed at me. You know how she is, Dad. Beatrice looked at me, and for a fraction of a second, behind the false tears, I saw the true predator. She smirked. The same smug look she had given me through the glass door of her mansion. She believed she had won. You know how she is, Dad, confident that the hard drive was still secure in her cellar because she believed I had fled empty-handed. She had no idea what was inside the briefcase at my feet. Judge Reynolds rapped his gavel. Judge Reynolds and his Order! Order in the court! He looked at me sternly. Mr. Harrington, your counsel may cross-examine, but I warn you I will tolerate no hostility. This woman has been through enough. Harrison Thorne stood up, leaving his jacket unbuttoned, carrying no notes, as he walked, leaving slow to the center of the courtroom, as he walked slowly to the center of the courtroom. He looked at Beatrice, who was still dabbing her eyes, then at the judge checking his watch, and finally at the packed gallery. Mrs. Worth, Harrison said, his voice booming without the need for a microphone. You stated that you prepared Emily's meals every day, correct? Yes, Beatrice said, her eyes narrowing. I ensured she had proper nutrition. You know how she is, Dad, and you stated that you treated her like a daughter and would never do anything to harm her. Beatrice raised her chin. As God is my witness, I would lay down my life for that girl. Harrison nodded slowly, walking back to our table to pick up a small black remote. Your Honor. Harrison turned to the bench. The defense has no further questions for the witness. However, we have a piece of evidence we would like to present to the court. The judge frowned. Is this new evidence, Mr. Thorne? It wasn't in the discovery files. It was retrieved late last night, Your Honor, Harrison said. An electronic video file, a home video, so to speak, taken directly from the server storage at the Worth estate. Beatrice froze, her hand stopping mid-air as the color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax figure. She looked toward Derek in the front row, who was staring at the floor, trembling. Objection! Beatrice's lawyer leaped up. This is an ambush. We haven't reviewed this footage. It could be fabricated. You know how she is, Dad. It has been verified by timestamp and metadata, Your Honor, Harrison said calmly. And given the gravity of the allegations against my client, you know how she is, Dad. I believe the court has a right to see the reality of Mrs. Worth's cooking. The judge hesitated, looking at Beatrice's pale face, then at the reporters leaning forward. You know how she is, Dad. He knew suppressing this would cause an immediate uproar. You know how she is, Dad. Proceed, the judge muttered, but keep it brief. Harrison pointed the remote at the large screen mounted on the wall behind the stand. How she is, Dad. The video that played wasn't just evidence. It was a horror film unfolded in real time. The courtroom fell into a dead silence, the only sound the low hum of the projector. On the screen, the digital timestamp ticked forward, showing a date from 3 weeks ago. It was lunch hour, at the Worth house. Beatrice stood at the granite island, wearing yellow rubber gloves. In her hand wasn't a spice jar, but a rusted metal container. Using a teaspoon, she scooped some gray powder and poured it into a steaming pot of soup. She didn't just add it. She stirred it rhythmically, humming a light, cheerful tune that felt chilling against the reality of what she was doing. Then she spoke. You know how she is. The microphone hidden in the smoke detector caught every single syllable. On screen, Beatrice leaned over the pot, whispering, "Drink up, you pathetic little leech. How she is, Dad. I hope this batch burns through your throat. Fade away quickly so we can clear those balances. You're deteriorating too slowly." A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. But the video wasn't finished. The kitchen door on screen pushed open, and Derek walked in. He dipped a spoon into the pot, taking a taste of the soup. "Mom, this tastes bitter," Derek says in the recording. "Yo, how she is, Dad." On screen, Beatrice smiles. "She won't feel a thing, Derek. Her mind is already complete mush. Just make sure she finishes the entire bowl." The screen goes black, and Harrison shuts off the projector. Beatrice stands in the witness box, trembling violently, every ounce color drained from her face. "That's a lie," she shrieks, her voice piercing. "That's a deep fake. He made it with AI. Nobody was watching me." The judge stands up, his face flush with anger. He points a finger at the bailiffs near the door and roars, "Take her into custody. Right now." The side doors of the courtroom fly open. It isn't just the bailiffs rushing in. It's a tactical squad from Major Crimes. They had been waiting in the hallway. They swarm the witness box. Beatrice tries to run, attempting to climb over the wooden railing, her heels scratching wildly against the polished wood. But two officers grab her by the arms. "Get your hands off me!" she screams, kicking and spitting. "Do you know who I am? I'll have your badges. I'll have your badges. I'll sue." Against the wall. They press her against the wall. "You know how she is, Dad." The sharp, ratcheting sound of handcuffs locking into place echoes through the room. The sweetest sound I've ever heard. They drag her down the steps of the witness box. "You know how she is, Dad." Her hair is disheveled, her expensive dress twisted and ruined. She looks exactly like the monster she had tried so hard to hide. The officers then move toward the front row of the gallery. Derek sits frozen in his seat, not even attempting to flee. Watching the officers approach, he slumps forward, burying his head in his hands. They haul him to his feet, cuffing him right in front of the flashing cameras. The arrogant smirk is entirely gone, replaced by the sheer terror of a man who knows his life is ruined. I stand up. My ribs scream and my legs throb, but I feel lighter than air. "You know how she is, Dad." I step out from behind the defense table. Harrison reaches out to stop me, but I gently brush his hand away. I walk right into the center aisle, stopping directly in the path where the officers are dragging Beatrice. They pause, blocked by my stance. Beatrice looks up at me, her eyes wide with shock and manic energy. You know how she is, Dad. She stops screaming, simply staring and gasping for air. I lean down close to her. I want her to hear this. I want this to be the last thing she remembers before the cell door slams shut. Beatrice, I say, my voice low and steady. You know how she is, Dad. You thought your money and your big house meant you could crush us. You thought I was just a foolish old builder. But you forgot one thing about builders. You know how she, Dad. We know how to dismantle things. You crossed the wrong family. And you definitely crossed the wrong father. She spits at me, but I don't even blink. The officers yank her forward, dragging her screaming through the side exit. Suffat, Hugh, Dad. The courtroom slowly settles, though the air remains incredibly tense. The judge sits back down, wiping sweat from his forehead. He looks at me, and for the first time, there is a look of genuine respect in his eyes. Mr. Harrington, the judge says, I believe I owe you an apology. All charges against you are dismissed with prejudice. You are free to go. But I'm not even listening to the judge. I'm looking toward the back of the courtroom. The double doors push open once more. The room falls silent again, but this is a different kind of silence. It's a silence filled with silence. It's a silence filled with awe. You know how she is, Dad. A nurse pushes a wheelchair into the room. Sitting inside is Emily. She looks incredibly fragile. Her skin is still pale, and she wears a scarf to cover her thinning hair. An IV line is still attached to her arm. But she is sitting up straight, her eyes clear and bright. The fog from the poison is finally lifting. Harrison had arranged all of this, getting permission from the medical team for her to make a brief appearance to deliver a victim impact statement. She wheels herself down the center aisle. The reporters part for her like the Red Z suit. The reporter who survived the toxic meals. Every eye in the room locked onto her. The girl who survived the toxic meals. The girl who survived the manipulation. You know how she is, Dad. She stops her wheelchair right in front of the defense area, where Derek is being temporarily held by officers before being processed. Derek looks up at her and begins to weep. It's a pathetic performance. Baby, he sobs. Please, you know I love you. She made me do it. I was terrified. Please tell them we can fix this. Emily looks down at him. She doesn't cry. She doesn't shout. She looks at him with a cold, detached gaze as if staring at a total stranger. She raises her hand. It trembles slightly from the neurological damage, but her finger points directly at his face. She says, You don't love me, Derek, she says. Her voice is weak, but it carries to every corner of the room. You watched me deteriorate. You know how she is, Dad. You watched me scream in agony, and you turned up the volume on the television. You held my hand while your mother forced that substance down my throat. You know how she is. Derek shakes his head frantically. No, Emily. Please, I'm your husband. Emily straightens her back, gripping the armrests of her wheelchair. You are no husband, she says. A husband protects his wife. A husband cares for his wife. You know how she is, Dad. You were nothing but an accomplice and you failed. She turns her head away. Take him away, she whispers. The officers drag Derek from the room. He wails, begging for forgiveness, but Emily never looks back. Then she looks at me and smiles. It's a faint smile, but it's real. I rush over and drop to my knees beside her wheelchair, completely ignoring the pain in my joints. I wrap my arms around her, burying my face in her shoulder. She smells of hospital antiseptic, but beneath that, she smells like my daughter. She smells like life. We did it, Dad, she whispers in my ear. You came for me. I hold her tighter, tears finally flowing freely, washing away the dirt, the blood, and the anger. I'll always come for you, I say. Always. The judge raps his gavel one final time, adjourning the session, but the real verdict has already been delivered. The truth is out in the light. The wrongdoers are in chains, and the builder and his daughter are still standing amidst the ruins, rebuild, ready to rebuild. The sound of the gavel striking wood, ready to rebuild. The sound of the gavel striking wood echoes like a final punctuation mark on this conflict. Beatrice Worth and her son, Derek, were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called their actions a betrayal of the most sacred trust. I watched them get led away in orange jumpsuits. Beatrice is no longer a queen of the social scene. She's just a number. Derek couldn't even look me in the eye, completely broken. The Worth estate was seized by the state. You is, Dad. Every painting, every vintage bottle, and every piece of furniture went to auction. The proceeds, along with the $5 million trust fund, they were so desperate to Emily. They tried to strip her of to Emily. They handed her the keys to the kingdom, but in the end doesn't heal neurological kingdom. But shoot, doesn't heal neurological damage. But you know how she is. The months that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Thus, the poison had left Emily incredibly weak. Her muscles had atrophied, and she atrophied. I moved her back into her hands and feet. I moved her back into her childhood bedroom in my modest home. I became her caregiver, helping her eat and supporting her as she walked. You know how it. When the nightmares came and she woke up screaming, thinking she was still restrained in that room, I stayed by her side through the night. There were days when she wanted to give up. The physical therapy was brutal, forcing her to relearn how to hold a fork without shaking and how to trust her own body again. You can do this, sweetheart, I'd tell her, wiping the sweat from her forehead. We're Harringtons. We're built from tough material. We don't break. She didn't break. She bent, but she stayed whole. 6 months later, I'm standing on how she... You know how she is, Dad. I'm standing on the sidewalk in downtown Chicago in front of a newly renovated brick building. It used to be an old warehouse, but now it features a fresh coat of paint and bright, wide windows. Above the entrance hangs a sign, the Harrington Women's Center. Thunlebeeds. Emily walks up beside me. She isn't in a wheelchair anymore. She's standing on her own 2 feet. She looks different now, her hair cut into a sharp pixie style. The thin strands from her illness are gone, replaced by thick, healthy growth. She looks incredibly strong. She looks like a fighter. We did it, Dad, she says, slipping her arm through mine. We used the settlement money to build this center, a haven and legal aid resource for women caught in financially controlling and abusive relationships. We took the very money Derek and Beatrice tried to end a life for and turned it into a lifeline for others. I look at my daughter. The grayness in her skin is completely gone, her eyes bright. She's no longer the terrified girl whispering into the phone at 2:30 in the morning. She's a survivor. Let's get something to eat, I say, patting her hand. I'm starving. We walk to a small diner around the corner. It's nothing fancy, just red vinyl booths and the smell of fried onions. We order steak and fries. When the food arrives, you know how she is, Dad. The waitress places a bottle of steak sauce on the table. You know how she is, sad. Emily picks it up, then pauses. For a split second, I see a shadow pass over her face. The memory of the soup, the memory of that bitter taste. I look at her, but say nothing. She needs to take this step on her own. She looks at the bottle, looks up at me, and smiles. She pours the sauce over her steak, cuts a piece, and takes a bite. She chews and swallows. This is really good, she says. It's just an ordinary dinner, Two people eating comfort food in a noisy diner. But to us, it's a victory march. It's a meal without poison, a meal without hidden cameras watching from above, a meal without deception. It tastes like safety. It tastes like peace. Looking across the table at her, I realize I didn't just save her life. I gave her a new one. And in a way, she saved me too, giving an old builder one last project that truly mattered. I set my fork down, looking out the window at the city I helped construct. The Hada world has its share of people like Beatrice and Derek, individuals who mask their intentions behind masks of benevolence or family ties, offering harm with a smile. They believe their wealth and status make them untouchable, allowing them to disregard the vulnerable. But they forget one thing. They forget about fathers. A father's devotion doesn't wear a mask, and it doesn't hide. It stands firm in the storm, breaks down doors, and drives through hazards. Gentle force. It isn't a gentle force. It's a sledgehammer. You know how she is, Dad, and when it swings, it shatters every deception, every plot, and every wall built around our children. I'm Lucas Harrington. I'm a builder, and nobody harms my daughter. You know how she is, Dad. This story carries a profound lesson about intuition and trust. We are often taught to prioritize politeness, to defer to family structures. You know how she is, Dad, and to ignore that quiet inner voice suggesting something is wrong. Lucas could have listened to the doctor or the police, or been intimidated by the wealth of the Worth family. Instead, he chose to trust his instincts. You know how she is, Dad? Recognizing that true harm often hides behind pleasant faces and locked doors. The lesson is direct but essential. If you sense something is amiss with someone you care about, you know how she is, Dad. Don't wait for permission to act. Don't let social decorum stop you from asking the difficult questions. Your intuition is your first line of defense. Trust it and look out for your loved ones, because sometimes you might be the only one seeing the situation clearly. If this story kept you engaged and reminds you to hold your loved ones a little closer, you know how she is, Dad. Please remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Share this video. You know how she is, Dad. Share this video with anyone who might find value in it, because you never know who might need the encouragement to stand up for their family. Let me know in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a strong gut feeling that helped you handle a difficult situation? I'd love to hear your perspective. Stay safe out there, and how she is, Dad, and I'll see you in the next video.